Agendas for study sessions, including concept reviews, can be found by visiting Broomfield's website at broomfield.org. Our agenda this evening includes 2 study session items. Seeing there are no concept reviews on the agenda this evening, there will not be any public comment. You can watch the study session live on Channel 8 and through video streaming at broomfield.org/council meetings. But please note, tonight we are experiencing a technical issue with the sound for our streaming through broomfield.org. And we recommend residents watch tonight's meeting either on Channel 8 or through Broomfield's YouTube channel. Once again, the audio on the website is not working. So if you'd like to join us remotely, your best option is Channel 8, and if not, Broomfield's YouTube channel. For our hard of hearing residents present, we have wireless headsets available through our AV team in the back of the council chambers. Our first item this evening is a discussion related to potential public land dedication code updates. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, and I'll ask our staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Marion. Good evening, council and community. Brandon Rowe is going to introduce us to this item and walk us through. He's the planning manager. Mr. Rowe.
Thank you, City Manager Hoffman. Good evening, Mayor. Mayor Pro Tem is not here. City Council, Brandon Rowe, Planning Manager. The study session this evening is regarding proposed updates to the Broomfield Municipal Code related to public land dedication, or PLD. As part of the study session, a draft ordinance was provided for review and to assist with that discussion. This draft ordinance was based upon the recommendations in the 2024 OSPRT plan, which Council adopted in February of 2024. There's been no major deviations from the prior recommendations that Council had seen before. We've just put it into an ordinance format. Next slide, please. So big picture, public land dedication regulations are a critical and crucial element for new residential development within Broomfield. They help us to ensure that as new residential projects come in, they contribute proportionally to the community's parks, open space, trails, and recreational infrastructure. PLD requirements are currently based on the anticipated population growth resulting from these developments, and PLD can be satisfied either through land dedication, cash in lieu, or a combination of land and cash. We do have limited regulations related to PLD in the Broomfield Municipal Code, which were adopted in 1987. Next slide, please. The original PLD code requirements have been refined and modernized through an operational policy, which was established by the OSPRT plan back in 2005 and has continued to evolve with the most recent iteration approved last year. This policy, this operational policy, has helped guide the PLD process for approximately 20 years now. Next slide, please. Broomfield has a goal of maintaining 40% of the community as open lands. Open lands is an umbrella term which includes open space, parks, and other open lands. The image on this slide was also included in the staff memorandum, which provides examples of what these 3 categories are under the open lands umbrella. PLD is one of the tools that Broomfield has to help continue to make progress towards this 40% goal. Next slide, please. As previously discussed, the 2024 OSPRT plan included recommendations related to PLD, including replacing the existing out-of-date regulations that are in the municipal code with those that align better with the operational policy we've had in place. The reasons for these proposed changes are listed on this slide and were included in the staff memorandum, but a few to highlight are that the changes to PLD will help multi-unit projects provide on-site PLD, particularly on smaller infill lots. It'll help to balance community goals like the 40% open lands goal and inclusionary housing. And it'll help to advance the desire for higher density development in Broomfield and help us to get those higher density projects onto sites. Next slide, please. So the current PLD operational policy is based on that 2005 OSPRT plan. It established a requirement for 24 acres of public land dedication per 1,000 residents that a project generates. Residential generation rates are currently single unit and duplex. We estimate generate 2.93 persons per unit, townhomes 2.5, apartments and condominiums 1.91. The current policy also requires 25% of a project site to be on-site dedication. So this roughly translates to 1/4 of an acre of on-site PLD per 1 acre of a project area. And then the remaining public land dedication obligation for projects based on the residential generation beyond the 25% onsite dedication, again, can be met through additional onsite dedications, cash in lieu, or a combination of land and cash. The current cash in lieu rate is $86,000 per acre. Next slide, please. So the first major proposed change to the PLD includes creating 3 methodologies for achieving public land dedication and meeting those obligations. And these are based on the type of residential product that is being provided. So methodology 1 will be market rate residential projects. The second methodology covers 100% income aligned housing units at or below 60% of the area median income. And then the third methodology is a bit of a mouthful, but it's residential projects that have a percentage of income aligned housing units or are 100% income aligned housing projects that are above 60% AMI. For the simplicity of the presentation, I'll just refer to these as mixed income projects. Next slide, please. So the methodology for public land dedication for 100% market rate housing projects. So these are projects that don't provide us any on-site affordable housing. They are just market rate units. Staff is moving forward with a recommendation from the OSPRT plan that recommends making no changes to the public land dedication obligation. So regardless of the site size, these projects will be required to provide 25% of the site as public land dedication on site. If they meet that obligation, the unmet balance could be paid at the average value per acre, which is that $86,000 per acre. And then if they don't meet that on-site dedication, the unmet balance of the 25% minimum on-site will need to be paid at a market value per acre, and that'll be calculated based on the project. And then once they meet that requirement, the remaining balance would be the $86,000 per acre. So an example of that is a 300-unit apartment complex on a 10-acre property. We would expect 2.5 acres of land dedicated to meet the 25% requirement, and then an additional almost $970,000 in cash in lieu. If they didn't meet the on-site dedication, the 2.5 acres of land that we anticipate being dedicated would be paid at that higher market rate value. Next slide, please. The second method is for 100% income aligned housing projects that meet 60% of the area median income or less. The amount of on-site public land dedication for these projects is contingent upon the site size. So for projects that are 10 acres in size or greater, a required minimum of 20%, so this is a 5% reduction from the current operational policy, would be required. If a project provides that 20% on-site, then there would be no additional cash in lieu required. If the project does not provide the minimum required on-site public land dedication, the proposal is to allow them to meet that by paying the $86,000 per acre average value as opposed to a market value. The same sort of process for projects that are less than 10 acres. It would just be a 15% minimum on-site dedication as opposed to 20%. An example for this is a 75-unit apartment complex, providing all of the units at 60% AMI on a 5-acre property. The obligation would be 3/4 of an acre of land and no additional cash in lieu. Next slide, please. This slide shows the process for meeting PLD for a mixed income project. We keep with the less than or greater than 10 acres breakdown. We maintain the 20% and 15% required on-site dedication based on the size of the property. The big difference here is that if on-site dedications are met and the projects are providing a proportion of their site as as income aligned housing, they could be eligible for public land dedication cash in lieu waivers or reductions. And that would be based on the proportion of the number of income aligned units and the rate of income restrictions. Next slide, please. So the tables are a little complex, but they're pretty simple matrices. So the thought process here is that along the top, we have the level of income restrictions. So 60% or below would represent 60% of the AMI or less. Greater than 100 is above 100% of the AMI. And then on the left-hand side of the table, we have the income-aligned units, the share of the overall development, starting at 0% and going up to 100%. So if there was a project that was proposing 20% of the units for rent project at 60% or below of the AMI, we would use the matrix, sort of put fingers on both ends, meet in the middle, and determine that they qualify for a 20% reduction in cash in lieu. Next slide, please. This table represents the proposed reductions for cash in lieu fees for sale products. For sale products oftentimes come in at a higher level of income. So the proposal here is for 100% or less of the area median income to be provided with an opportunity to qualify for reductions based on the proportion of the number of units. This aligns with the updated income or inclusionary housing ordinance that's in Broomfield Municipal Code. And then anything over 100% of the AMI is not proposed to qualify for any cash in lieu reductions. Next slide, please. So now that I threw 3 tables back, if we could go back 1 slide real quick, thanks. We'll go through an example of that just so it makes a little more sense. So we're sticking with the 300 apartments on a 10-acre property. This time they're providing 20% of their units at 60% of the area median income. That means that they would qualify for a 20% cash in lieu reduction. So typically that 300 unit apartment complex on 10 acres would owe us just over $1 million in cash in lieu for public land dedication. Factoring that reduction, the new cash in lieu that would be due for this project, if they provided that 20% of the units at 60% AMI, would be just over $800,000. So in the end, we still receive 2 acres of land of on-site dedication required for that 20%, and we would receive $808,400 in cash in lieu. Next slide, please. This slide provides a comparison of all of the proposed methods with the current policy. So the current PLD policy is the top row. You can see the market rate is consistent with that current policy. And then the 100% income aligned and then the mixed income provide option A and option B based on the size of the properties. They maintain the 20% or the 15% minimum on-site dedication. The big difference is those cash in lieu requirements. Next slide, please. So in addition to the methods to PLD, there is a proposal to make some additional changes to the public land dedication requirements. Those include, I'm sorry, it looks like we're having some trouble moving on to the next slide. Thanks. On-site dedications for parcels that are less than 3 acres in size. So we would continue to have these parcels or tracts be eligible for credit as public land dedication. The change is proposing that rather than actually dedicating those to the city and county of Broomfield for ownership, they would remain in private ownership and maintenance. They would have a permanent public access easement recorded against the property, which would allow for the landowner to understand their obligations and have that count as public land dedication. The basis behind that is that these smaller tracts are a bit of a burden for our maintenance crew. So by having those remain in private maintenance, the HOA or Metro District or whatever entity is in charge of the neighborhood would maintain it, but they would be a public asset and they would be given credit for that. An additional change in the proposed ordinance is to change the credit that we provide for schools, detention ponds, drainage channels, and other water bodies. So currently we provide a 50% public land dedication credit for detention ponds and drainage channels. The proposal is to reduce that to 25%. The basis behind that being that many of these aren't super usable spaces. Detention ponds oftentimes just have a pedestrian trail that circles it with a couple benches. In contrast, things like lakes, ponds, streams, rivers, creeks, those are natural assets that oftentimes not only provide public land dedication opportunity, but have habitat that would be suited to be preserved or improved. So the proposal is to increase those credits from 25 to 50%. And we are not proposing any changes to school site credits. So it would remain at 50%, not to exceed 5 acres. Next slide, please. Some additional changes are some corrections to terminology errors in Title 17, that's the zoning code, specifically in the PUD and SDP regulations. This would change references to open space to private open area. Open space has a very specific meaning, whereas private open area is a larger umbrella term. We are also proposing to change the minimum required private open area for residential PUDs from 40% to 30%. One thing that we would want to note is that that means that a residential development zone PUD would still need to provide the minimum on-site PLD plus 30% of the remaining site as private open area. So if you were to look at a property that would qualify for 20% of the site on-site requirement, you're still looking at 50% of the site being reserved as combined public land dedication and private open area. Another change that's being included in the ordinance is setting expectations for the cash in lieu rate. So the ordinance proposes that this would be updated every 2 years based on large parcel sales. Again, that current rate is $86,000. We anticipate that to be updated later this year based on sales. And this just allows for developers to understand when that change in value would occur. And then a key element that remains unchanged with this ordinance is that the open space, parks, recreation, and trails plan objective to preserve 40% of Broomfield as open lands is remaining in place. Next slide, please. So next steps, if directed to move forward, we would create a Broomfield voice page related to the regulations. That would be up until the second reading. So we would collect public comments that we receive. We would bring forward a proposed ordinance to codify the regulations outlined in the study session or as amended by council, with first reading tentatively scheduled in August and second reading in September. Next slide, please. And then we don't have a formal question for you this evening, but we do want to note that we'd appreciate guidance if council wishes for us to move forward with this ordinance. One thing that we would like to note is this ordinance creates expectations and knowns for the development community and for the community as a whole. We do recognize that not every project is a square project that fits in a square peg. So there is the potential that if a unique project were to arise, they could request variances from the code once it was approved and council just directed us to move forward. And that variance would be something that would be subject to council approval. So that concludes staff's presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rowe. We'll proceed with council questions and comments. Would any member of council like to start us off on the conversation? Councilmember Cohen.
As I mentioned in the email, there's a lot of numbers. Can you summarize the overall strategy of what we're trying to accomplish? There were 6 points in the memo from the OSPRT plan, which basically says the multifamily projects are challenging. We want more public land dedication, less cash in lieu. Is that?
Councilmember, thank you for the question. Yeah, so it's aiming to balance the interest of densification, including income aligned housing, with getting more strategic public land dedications. So utilizing the land for a private property more efficiently to get the density while not giving up all of the public land dedication. We've seen that come in with income aligned projects asking for everything to be waived. We're trying to balance both those goals.
How does it square that we've got most of our affordable housing from cash and lieu payments going to the BHA? Hundreds of units in line because of that and a handful of from the marketplace.
Yeah, so we have seen an uptick in the number of income aligned housing units proposed with projects and approved with projects since the IHO was recently updated. There has been a significant number of those being apartment units. So with this ordinance, part of that goal is by providing incentives, hopefully we would be able to incentivize additional units and some for sale units.
So are we projecting we would still have the same or more affordable housing as a result of this, or there might be a decline in affordable housing, honestly?
Yeah, so we haven't looked really deep at that, but we don't anticipate there being a decline because the IHO still has the requirements in place. Here, it's just balancing those two interests and with the goal of getting actual units on the ground as opposed to cash and loan.
The 10-acre division delineation, how many projects come in that are more than 10 versus those that are less than 10 proportionally?
I would say that historically, we've seen a large number of properties over 10 acres, but as we've continued to move towards infill development, we're seeing smaller and smaller parcels. So I think of the projects that we have in right now, or recently, I'd say probably 40% at most are greater than 10 acres if it's not a master plan community, and the rest are smaller.
So going forward, we anticipate more, less than 10.
Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, this probably would not happen, but if you had a 20-acre parcel you want to develop, that's 4 acres. If you divide it in 10, it's 1.5 each or 3 acres. So is there any incentive for people to split their parcels up and dedicate less land?
So there is a factor that was included in the ordinance but wasn't discussed here. Just trying to be brief in presentation. But there is a provision in the proposed ordinance that would not allow a developer to purposely fragment their property to circumvent the ordinance and the requirements. Especially for smaller properties where we may waive requirements. We don't want them to break it up into 3 or 4 2-acre parcels.
Yeah, I'm sure it's rare that things would line up that way, but I'm just curious where the incentives lie if you really want to game it out to try and get as much land as possible to build on. So is it your sense, have other communities done similar strategies like this to incentivize more building and more dedicated land?
I'm gonna look to Kristen Pritz because I know she did a deeper dive into the other communities and what their requirements are.
I'm just curious if there's history to guide us.
I won't play the Jeopardy music as she walks up.
Kristen Pritz, Director of Open Space and Trails. So when we did the Open Space and Parks Recreation Trails Plan, we did use a consultant for that project, DTJ, that works with a lot of developers on projects. And we did that purposefully because we wanted to try to be realistic the way we wanted to solve this public land dedication, income aligned housing and density. We did look at other communities. I can't recite all of that analysis, but we did look at that. And we also had a focus group with developers. We invited about 29. We had 10 show up, many of the names you would recognize. And they were very helpful in providing us insights in how we could update the public land dedication and make this more doable.
Is our public land dedication at the top of the chart in terms of what we're demanding versus what other communities are asking for?
I think we're kind of in the lower upper mid-range. So not average, but
Above
up in that
average.
area. And the other thing I would say is, in most cases, we are not requiring completed parks. We're trying to get the land in a lot of cases. In some cases, the developers do. But many now are asking to take the cash in lieu payment and use it to make the improvements on some of the land that they're providing.
So if the developers, I mean, did they have a wish list of what they would, is this what they preferred, or how close are we to what they think
So,
will put them on the chart?
I
to
just
develop
kind of
here?
wrote down some of the key points that we gleaned from, we had two focus groups for the housing folks. The second one, we didn't get a good turnout, so we just sent them the actual information. The first focus group, the staff did not attend, and DTJ's vice president handled the discussion. So connectivity is important. Focus on the quality of spaces that are accessible. Link trails to encourage alternative transportation. Accommodate higher density. Desire to find sustainable solutions that fit the demand for housing and open lands, and focus on prioritizing smaller, high-quality sites. Those were some of the key points that I just thought might relate to tonight's conversation.
And I wanted to ask, before my time runs out, I think it was Councilmember Ward brought it up. If a development, is there any reason to take into account that if a development comes in and it's close to open space? So for instance, if the Miller property had sold and someone built apartments there, would it make sense to require 25% of that to be PLD when it's right next to the commons and next to open space across the street?
I think it's something that should be looked at if it's a completely, what would be the right word? A project that has absolutely no income aligned housing in it. You're still building a project that brings population into the community and there's a need. And the public sector doesn't necessarily, or is able to provide all those needs. So it's more of a, shouldering some of the population, which, we want the higher density. I think we heard that from the community and from the city council.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
That's all I have for now.
Right, thank you. Councilmember Lim.
I understand that this is meant to incentivize the on-site PLD over the cash in lieu. But have we done any estimation at all as to the impact it might have on the amenities or what that the cash in lieu is used for? So could you describe briefly, I know the memo said that cash in lieu is used for parks, recreation, open space trail improvements, land acquisition. Okay, so if we don't have as much cash in lieu, which is part of this goal, then what impact will it have on our ability to do things with the cash in lieu?
Councilmember Lim, thank you for the question. So the ordinance does include a provision as proposed that would require amenitization of public land dedication. So as Director Pritz just noted, we've seen an uptick of projects where they want to provide just the land or utilize the cash in lieu that we would regularly get and apply that towards amenitization of their property. Here we would be requiring amenities on the site unless for some reason it wasn't appropriate and council were to approve that as a variance, plus the cash in lieu. So we would see a small reduction in cash in lieu, but we'd still have, aside from the 100% market or affordable projects at 60% AMI, which is a very small cohort of development that we see in Broomfield. The vast majority is that mixed income category. So we'd still see an influx of cash be slightly reduced, but we'd be getting both. And the goal here is by requiring amenities on the public land dedication sites, we're getting better quality as well upfront.
Okay, and we don't use those cash in lieu funds for maintenance or improvement of amenities on existing parks or anything like that, where we're going to miss that cash?
We do. We don't see, based on the analysis, the 20% reduction. Most of the projects aren't going to be 100% income aligned, so we'll be getting those some funds coming in, which will help us to provide that maintenance. Generally speaking, the larger sums that dive into capital projects is definitely the amenitization of the project. New equipment is the most expensive.
Okay, thank you. In the case of redevelopment, like of infill, how does it, I guess, any redevelopment project that comes before us would trigger these new guidelines, correct? And then the one that struck me as possibly being the most impactful, but that maybe you have another idea, would be, okay, so we're reducing like the allowance for detention ponds or something like that. Okay, so now this infill project had a certain amount of PLD that was part of the detention pond, and now it's only part of that detention pond that counts for that. So did you think all that out with redevelopment?
Thank you. So redevelopment, I'll start at the beginning. Yeah, any redevelopment project that includes a residential component would trigger the public land dedication requirements and would be something that would come forward. The goal with the reduction in the detention pond area was to emphasize the higher utilization and value of public land dedication. Redevelopment may be part of that square peg round hole type discussion where there may be variances that need to be requested and that'd be subject to council's approval. But they would still be expected to meet the requirements if they weren't able to provide the full on-site because it's a smaller site, more difficult. Then there's the option for them to provide a portion of that on-site dedication as a market rate payment. So there's avenues for us to still check all the boxes for public land dedication.
Okay, okay, thank you. In mixed use developments, refresh my memory on, do we do these calculations with the amount of residential in a mixed use development?
We do. So public land dedication in a mixed use development, something that's commercial, think retail and residential, we factor in just the residential component. So if a 10-acre property is mixed use and 2 acres of that is residential, the 2 acres would be the basis for the public land dedication.
Okay. So under this scenario, we could have a development that chooses no public land dedication and then just pays everything with cash in lieu. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's also an option today with the current policy.
Okay. I guess my question is, we have not seen, I mean, you said it's a current option right now. We have not seen developments come before us like that with absolutely no pocket park or something like that too often. Is that a conversation that goes on before we see it on council with, hey, do you at least want to put in a pocket park here?
Councilmember, that's a great question. So there is a long discussion with developers prior to them getting to city council hearings where we talk about community needs, expectations. The reality is as residential projects come in, especially if they're not near an existing park or open space, there is a need and a value for those amenities for their residents. And if we as staff felt that it was a critical need or something of concern, that would potentially be a key issue identified in a project moving forward.
Okay, that would be good. I mean, my concern is maybe not in the same direction as what Councilmember Ward's question was. I mean, my concern is more like if there's young families there, you don't want to walk a half an hour to get to a park. So that's an expression of my concern is the process allows for it, but I wondered if there's at least some discussion in the background, especially if staff knows the other open space or parks are not close by. In the proposed code changes that are related to the PLD, that section. So there's a list of other requirements related to the PLD. What struck me that wasn't there was that any of the parks or open space would have to require our landscape code. Is that stated somewhere else? Is that implied or what?
It's implied. So because it's in the code, we would expect every project that comes forward to comply with the landscape code.
Okay, that's good. Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
All right, thank you very much. Next is Councilmember Nguyen.
Thank you, Mayor. I thank you for the presentation, Mr. Rowe. I only have 2 brief questions. Question number 1 is, When was the last time that public land dedications were changed or revised?
So we revisit the value per acre for the cash in lieu on a regular basis. I've been with Broomfield for just about 8 years, and I think we've updated it 3 times in those 8 years. But the 24 acres per 1,000 people has been a policy that's been in place for the last roughly 20-ish years. And that was an update that was more in line with what we've seen in surrounding communities.
Thank you. It's good to know and understand the timeline because obviously, I think it is important to change and see what works and what fits. And that leads to my second question, which was the ponds and drainage credit. Obviously, you mentioned about the effects of this, why we have to do this. I just want to explore this a little bit more. Can you elaborate on why this would be impactful with reduction of the credit?
Yeah, so detention ponds themselves are artificial. They're intended to be sort of wet and muddy, so they're not really usable aside from the perimeter. Most of the projects that we've seen come forward that ask for credit for the detention ponds, they just add a trail around it. That's not of high value or use to the community. In contrast, something like a creek corridor, so the Nissen Channel type area where there's native environment, there's a pedestrian trail, there's also amenities for bird watching, other outdoor activities. Those are of a higher value.
No, this is good information. I think this really explains the thought and the work that staff has done. And I really appreciate your time. So thank you. Those are my questions, Mayor.
All right, thank you very much. Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor. A handful of questions, and I think Councilmember Cohen and Councilmember Lim actually asked a couple things similar, but I think I have something a little different. So for the first one, Councilmember Cohen asked about whether this would change the size of parcels, the look of those kinds of proposals that come forward. The thing that came to my mind was the split between residential and commercial. Do we anticipate any changes surrounding that? I know since these are stricter restrictions in a certain way.
We didn't look into that, but I can say generally, as you've probably seen, the predominant development that we've seen recently is residential. So we would anticipate that being the continued trend moving forward.
Okay, that makes sense. Cash in lieu doesn't explode what the market is clearly demanding. So there's that. And then I think my second question, I think Councilmember Lim actually may have hit on this when she was talking about the landscape code. My question was surrounding concerns, any potential concerns surrounding the kind of requirements in place for private open lands. Does that, if we're not administering them, does that potentially degrade the quality? Do we have any concerns since those aren't owned and administered by us?
Thank you, council member. So private open lands oftentimes include like little grassy areas, sidewalks, and single unit residential projects, sometimes yards. So they're oftentimes privately maintained. They're landscaped areas. They aren't large sprawling parks. So we don't typically see concerns. If there were concerns with maintenance of those, like if weeds were to get out of hand or something like that, that'd be something that code compliance could enforce.
Okay, so it sounds like that just would not be the case based on the size of the parcel, and then in addition to that, obviously we have code compliance. Okay, great. And then one more clarification questions, and I might have missed this. I know we reevaluate the cost per the market rate of an acreage. Do we also reevaluate the residential generation rate? So the persons per unit rates, is that also happening on every 2 years or?
Thank you, Councilmember. That was also a question that Councilmember Ward had asked in advance. We do constantly review those generation rates. We generate population projections on a regular basis, and we compare that to the numbers that are produced by the Department of Local Affairs, the demographer's office, and make sure that we remain consistent with that. And if we don't, we reevaluate to make sure that our population generations are accurate. to the best of our knowledge.
It sounds more frequent than that, and I did miss that question. So thank you for pointing that out. That's all for me. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you very much. Any other questions or comments from council? Just for clarification, this process that we're updating, the majority of it is the same process that we've been following for many, many years, right? Is it 1987?
A little later than 1987, but that's correct. We've been following this process
A
for
lot of this
a number
isn't
of years.
new.
Correct.
Okay, it's just got new eyes on it, maybe. But what I can see to make it really understandable for folks that is this is now creating an incentive for developers to provide income aligned housing, and in exchange, they will get a reduced public land dedication obligation. So that's what's new. Before we didn't have that. So this will help incentivize getting those income aligned units built by giving the developers a break on the PLD requirements.
That's correct, Mayor.
That's all that's new. Okay, thanks. That helps. Back to my colleagues. Councilmember Anderson hasn't gone yet, so I'll go to you first.
Thank you. And I appreciate that clarification because, yeah, then not much has changed here, just the percentages and the numbers. So I don't really have a lot of questions. I appreciate that staff has been very, very thorough. And one of the main things I think what we have benefited from is we're seeing these developments come forward is that the parks are already so often there and accessible. I can recall a couple of times where we had the discussion about the park distance, and I see this listed under the trails here and trying to get that 10-minute walkable piece. And I think there was that distinguishing question about like the 15-minute city and the 10-minute park. And as a parent, for many, taking my little kids to the park for many years, I think that 10 minutes is still really, really important. So I don't really have any questions on that. And I appreciate the clarification that so much of this happens behind the scenes. As they come forward, they're already meeting this. And even if there's a barrier in the access. So I think those are the most important pieces that I was looking at. So I appreciate this update, and the only direction is to whether or not we should move forward, and yes, we should move forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. I forgot to ask one question I had, but which I'll ask real quickly, and I wanted to clarify something else. But the focus groups with developers, was there also a focus group with the housing advocates? I mean, I'm looking at the memo, I don't know where BHA stands on this. Are they supporting?
Councilmember Cohen, I see Kristen heading up here because she was part of that process and I was not, so I don't want to misspeak. So she's going to sprint down the hall and give us an answer real quick.
Get more steps in.
Yeah, we invited a lot of people, and I think that I'm sure we had a fish representative there. And then some of the other names were not, like Broomfield Housing Authority. I don't think they were there. But we had Wonderland Homes, we had McWinney.
We don't know how BHA feels like this is a benefit to them or not.
No, I mean, I think I would have to go back and see if they were there. I honestly can't remember because I was not in the focus group.
Yeah.
But certainly we can reach out to them and discuss this with them.
I think it would be good. I mean, I would be more comfortable hearing their viewpoint as well, not just the developers, in terms of how they feel this might impact their operations as well. So if we can do that, I think that'd be very helpful before we bring anything back. And I wanted to follow up. I appreciate the mayor's clarification or contextualizing of what we're trying to accomplish here. But part of it sticks in my mind is that if it's a lower income, it has less public land. There's less public space or play space, so to speak, if it's lower income. And I'm just thinking, I'm picturing what's developing along US 36 is very dense apartments, not a lot of park space in that area that I think of one small park, and then it's Interlochen. So are we helping in that regard with this? Or are we creating more of a desert if you're lower income versus if you're in the more expensive apartments?
Thank you, Councilmember. So we do still require that private open area on site. Prime example of that is a income aligned project on 120th just down the street, where they have raised garden beds. So they've, instead of providing a park or something of that nature, they've raised garden beds and they have a playground. That's not technically public land dedication, so they're still providing on-site green space for their residents and opportunities to get outdoors. The balancing of public land dedication and requiring some portion on-site. Typically, income-aligned project sites are smaller areas to begin with, so we're getting smaller areas on site, but we still aim for those projects to provide usable space outdoors for the residents.
Space to run or throw a ball or have a dog run. Then
And that would be part of the discussion when we start to look at the proximity of the 10-minute walk to other facilities. I think there were some maps in the memo. There are maps in the OSBRT plan that identify that a large amount of Broomfield is within that 10-minute walk already to a facility.
I'm just curious, I live on the other side of town, but I'm picturing Arista and what's developing on 36, and I don't see parks or things that aren't a courtyard or a raised garden bed, but something that kids can go and play in. So would be one concern. And this is just a question off of left field, but do we work with transfer development rights at all, or have explored that at all in terms of working with developers to create larger park spaces in these areas instead of pocket parks? Because I seem to recall there was a development where the staff was critical of the pocket park as being too small to be really usable.
We don't formally call it TDR, but we do, when we go through the multiple rounds of review with the project, starting at pre-application, going through concept review, we emphasize the need for usable park space. I think I remember the project you were talking about with the pocket parks where we felt like they were just so disjointed that there wasn't a major value to that. And those are items that we flagged for the developer. And if they choose to move forward with that, we flag for council, and that's where the decision of whether it's appropriate or not comes in.
Do you think as we go through this process, that staff will be emphasizing the need for more usable play space, so to speak, that isn't a garden or a sitting area?
Councilmember, yes, we will.
Thank you. I appreciate all the work. I do have reservations that BHA and other housing advocates don't seem to have been part of this. So I would love to have input from them before this comes back. I understand what's trying to be achieved here, though. If we're not the most stringent in the area, I'm curious what we're going to actually accomplish versus what we have presently, but I'm certainly open to entertaining it. Thank you.
Councilmember, if I could real quick. BHA project, that's a prime example where this could have benefited previously, was the project over by Ball Swan, where they had not provided on-site public land dedication. They had to go through a variance process. That was 100% affordable project. They still would have needed to request a variance, but it would have been a significantly smaller variance than it was at the time of approval. We took their recent project experience into mind as we looked at how 100% affordable projects are sort of categorized here. Yep.
Of course, it's located next to a big park.
It is. Yeah.
So, okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comments or questions from my colleagues? So are we in agreement that staff should move forward with the draft ordinance related to the PLD as drafted by the OSBRT plan? Okay, well, you have your go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rowe, and to the entire team, Ms. Pritz, and all y'all too. Our next and final item this evening is a discussion regarding potential charter change recommendations and a request for direction on any 2025 ballot questions. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, and I'll ask our staff to begin the discussion.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, staff, community. Nancy Rogers, the city and county attorney, and I'm actually sort of happy to be back at the podium talking about the charter. Next slide. You giggle, but I don't say that in jest. Our charter was adopted originally in 1974. It's what made Broomfield a home rule city. In 2022, this council and some of your predecessors established a charter review committee, and that charter review committee spent a lot of time going through the charter line by line and trying to make recommendations about what should be changed. You might remember that last year, council approved certain questions to go to the ballot, and the voters approved some of the changes to the charter. Next slide. The changes that were already approved based in part on recommendations from the Charter Review Committee, in part on recommendations from the community, and in part on suggestions from council were term limits were added to the charter at 3. We can rezone and do land use decisions by resolution. We've actually already seen the beneficial impact of that efficiency change. Publications of ordinances are on the website now, not in the newspaper, although we do still continue to do hard publication in some regards. Significant changes on and updates on the personal merit system section, as well as legal and judiciary. The length of term for mayor from 2 years to 4 years, unfortunately, did not pass. That was our only question that did not pass. And then changes to Chapter 3 on elections passed. Next slide. So as a reminder, the process to amend our charter is that council would give direction to staff, to my office and the city manager's office to prepare questions for formal consideration. Then we would bring an ordinance back with a ballot question for first reading, second reading. That process must be done by August 12th if we're to get any questions on this year's ballot. If approved, the question is put on the ballot and voters approve or reject the question. So no decisions are being made tonight. No decisions are made when council approves a ballot question. It is only when the voters approve the question that the change goes into effect. Next slide. I'll just reiterate it again. I said it 100 times when we were going through this process before. Nothing is voted on tonight. Nothing is decided by this council. Charter is the voters' document, and they're the ones that get to approve any changes. Council directs the questions. We prepare them in ordinance, and the voters have the ultimate approval. Next slide. A little bit of background for those listening and for council. After a ballot question is approved, government funds and resources cannot be used to advocate for or against that ballot question. So some people might be wondering why there wasn't more campaigning on some of the ballot questions that last year. Broomfield as an organization and council members in their official capacity are restricted from using public funds to campaign on a ballot question. As individuals, you absolutely could. I can, anybody can in the community, but as an organization, we cannot. We also are limited by a single subject question. That gets a little complicated, and we'll talk a little bit tonight about Councilmember Ward's suggestion to do a repeal and reenact. That can be a single subject in one chapter, but generally we should try to make it one question, one change. And then you could, and we discussed this last year, if you'll recall, do an absolute full repeal and reenactment of the entire charter. To do that would be by ordinance, but you would need a 2/3 threshold of council to approve that type of ordinance. All right, so some timing and, next slide. Some timing and considerations, you know, as I talked about, although probably quickly, the Charter Review Committee was impaneled in 2022 and started doing their work in 2023. We did have a lot of questions on the ballot last year, a ballot that was very long for other reasons, not necessarily our changes. So there are some considerations. I came up with a few, you probably have others. What's truly a cleanup? What do we have to do? What do we need to change in our charter operationally right now? You might recall that last year staff had put that there was some high priority changes. That publication of ordinances is a great example because there was an expense tied with that. And we were also already using our website, and we were finding that was one of the most effective ways to communicate our council agendas and our publication of ordinances to our populace. So that was the type of change that staff was advocating as a high priority. This year, staff respectfully will say, yes, there's changes we would like to see, but nothing is a high priority. An example of that is intergovernmental agreements by charter have to be approved by 2/3 of council. No other contract or agreement that council does has to be approved in that way. It's not a high need. It's sort of on staff's wish list. That would be an example of what's a cleanup, what's something that's really needed now. Is there an option for a full repeal and reenact? Yes, but I will very briefly remind council what we talked about last year. That's a complicated question for the voters on a topic that charter that not a lot of our general populace know about. So a lot of education would be needed on a repeal and reenact. I wouldn't want people to think we're scratching the whole thing and starting over from scratch. So I do think we would have to do a lot of non-campaigning electioning and education, excuse me, if we were going to do a full repeal and reenact. I touched on what changes must happen now. Council might have different views of changes they might want to see. Ballot fatigue is definitely something that our voters experience. Maybe they're wondering, why is the charter back again? Didn't we take care of all this? And what changes that council feels don't need to be made immediately, or maybe not at all. One of the suggested changes is that we have city throughout our charter, not city and county. As a reminder, it was passed in 1974. That's not really a change that changes our status as a legal city and county, right? It would be nice to have, it would be consistent with how we try to brand ourselves as a city and county, but it's not necessarily needed now or even in the future. And what are some changes that could be covered by code, rules, or maybe procedures? An example of this is the Charter Review Committee has a recommendation that if there's a significant amendment on an ordinance on second reading, that there will be a third reading. Council has already made that change in its own rules. So, and granted, council rules can be changed by resolution a lot easier than the charter. So if you want to solidify that, a charter change would be appropriate. But maybe council feels that the council rules change hits on that need right now and a ballot question isn't needed. So those are some considerations. And like I said, you probably have others as we're talking about what to put on the ballot for this year. So in the packet, there was a chart. This was a chart that was made last year. It lists each section of charter and the Charter Review Committee's recommendation of a change. It also has sections where there was no recommendation for change, but council may have a thought about a change to that provision in charter. If there are questions that council wants to see, we would draft the ordinance and get those back to council in June and July for first and second reading. Like I said, August 12th is sort of the drop dead date to get on the November 2025 ballot. And we could also have a discussion of that one. I'm not this year, but maybe next year. And I will calendar a study session for this time next year and we can revisit this topic again, which is fine. So I did hyperlink for those who have access to the slides in the presentation file or for counseling your memo, that chart is hyperlinked. Oh, sorry, next slide. That chart is hyperlinked. I would pull it up here, but it does get pretty small, so I'm not going to do that. If there's a member of the public, we can get you a copy of it. And like I said, it's hyperlinked in the staff memo. Mayor, that's all for the presentation, but I'm here for questions. And then, of course, for the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming back with part two. There were a lot of charter recommendations. And for those who didn't remember, we didn't put even a fraction of them on last year's ballot because it was already such a large ballot. And we were worried about ballot fatigue. So these are the ones that we were not able to consider for the last ballot. Nothing new. And so I will go to my colleagues for feedback. Councilmember Marsh Holston.
Thank you, Mayor. Attorney Rogers, how many, if we were to put them all on the ballot as individual questions this year, how many are there?
I haven't counted, but I think, and I apologize for not doing that. We had that number from last year, and I want to say it's somewhere between 15 and 20. Because we can group them, trying to honor the single subject rule. There are some that we can group like we did last year for the changes to legal and judiciary. That was one question. So I think if I remember from our discussion last year, it was in the teens.
Okay. Thank you for bringing this to us again. I really don't have any other questions. I would like to see this get done as quickly as possible. So as many as we can put on the ballot this year without overwhelming the voters, especially the non-controversial ones. I trying to remember, it's been a while since we looked at this, obviously. I mean, just from the feedback we got, I think maybe the only one I could think of being controversial is the change to the vacancy procedure. But yeah.
Controversial is always in the eye of
Of
the
course,
beholder.
yeah, yeah, of course. So, all right, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. So no priorities. Okay. Anyone else? Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have a couple of priorities. I do think that the 50% of absences means a vacancy. I know we've been lucky enough to have a really great dedicated council. But I do think that is really important because we should be here and we should be present. And I think it's a nice thing to not slam the barn door once the horses have gotten out already, or whatever the saying is. So I think that's the one that I would want to prioritize. I think the other, let's see, the other one, I think that's the really substantive one that I would like to see. Oh, and that an elected official cannot hold two positions. We've seen this come up, not here in the state of Colorado, though. So I think that one is also one that's just worth addressing, and also for the good of the voters to make sure that whatever office you are in, you are fully present in that office. I think those two are the ones that I really would want to prioritize. And then I would also, knowing the one person's common sense amendment is another person's substantive change. With that in mind, I'm also going to say that I think some of the cleanup, I think we could do a little bit of that too as well. Have like two meaningful ones and then a little bit of cleanup. That would be my proposal. Thank you.
Of course, Ms. Rogers.
To Councilmember Marshall's question about how many questions do we have, I do think we could do a master cleanup. Like the question is, shall the charter I'll word it better, be cleaned up to hit on topics that hit like 7 or 8 of the sections. So I do think there could be a global cleanup question, as Councilmember Delgadillo suggested.
That's awesome. I mean, just fewer questions for everyone. I think that's great. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Feedback, Councilmember Lim.
I'm good with seconding Councilmember Delgadillo's 50% absences vacancy proposal and the elected not hold two positions. The other question, that staff, well, last year when we had medium priorities indicated on our chart, staff had indicated that for them, emergency ordinances having the possibility of being effective immediately, not 8 days later, was a medium priority for them. That seems like a good idea to me. So I would, unfortunately, we could run into situations where that's important. So.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Lim. I especially think in 2022, we are all recalling COVID, where emergency ordinance has had a big role, emergency orders, public safety orders. We haven't seen one, but you're right. In the moment that we need one, waiting that 8 days is not convenient. So I appreciate that note.
We're talking about wildfire code and everything else right now. We could have a wildfire or something, unfortunately, where we had to do something with emergency ordinances or anything. So yeah, that would be my proposal.
Councilmember Cohen.
I was just going to add to what Councilmember Marsh-Holson said. If we don't keep doing this every year, we'll be doing it for ages. So unless we want to put 8 or 9 on at once, I don't think people have too much fatigue because they won't remember probably voting on it last time with great precision. I was just going to add, I know Councilmember Ward gave a list of 5. I was going to ask if the vacancy bundle, or can they be bundled, or do they have to be all separate items? Or does vacancies count as a single topic?
They can be bundled, but I do want to point out that they are substantively, they all have their own meat to it. That somebody might not have the same opinion on the absences, but they want vacancies, filled by appointment until the next coordinated election. But we could do one global change to section 4.7 as one question.
4.7 could be one question.
It could be.
Okay. Which would, okay.
And that would, so the 3 for those listening and who might not have the chart in front of them, that would be 50% absences equals a vacancy. immediately once you hit that threshold. A council member vacancy is still filled by appointment, but only until the next coordinated election. That second part is not what's in charter, the only until next coordinated election. And then the last part was the mayor vacancy is filled by the mayor pro tem. Right now, a vacancy in the mayor is filled by appointment or by a special election, depending on the timing. So those would be the three components to a 4-7 question.
Okay, so and Councilmember Ward had vacancies. I would agree. He also had ethics code, which I would agree, 4.11. 6.8, I think, was the emergency ordinances. I would suggest maybe if we can suggest 5 would be a reasonable number
Have questions?
of ballot questions.
Ballot questions.
Not sure how many have been suggested so far, but
Not counting wards, we have, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Does that include the bundles?
That would include a big cleanup.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's nice. Anything else, Councilmember Cohen? Okay, Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. And I can agree with the direction we're headed here. I just have, that was my thought, has already been brought up before, but is there any other, like the emergency provisions, or were there any other remaining items that staff thought were high priority or medium priorities, or anything else that from a staff perspective, we'd want to put on the ballot this coming year?
I will soon look to my right to confirm, but no, when we surveyed all the department heads when we started doing this process and got their list and hit those high priorities last year, there were those medium ones that because of circumstance, we don't see them too often, and the emergency ordinance is a great example. But I don't think this year there's no question, no change that staff is like, please make this change now. We need it. But Manager Hoffman, yeah, confirmed.
Okay, thank you. Then I could go with if we're gonna do the vacancies, I would say just all 3 of them together. And I like the idea of doing the code of ethics and I'm not even, where is the one with the conflict of interest provision? We can't, I agree with that, but I keep missing it as I'm looking through the list. But that sounds reasonable in emergency ordinances and the cleanup. I would go with that. And I agree that we should keep making progress going forward and tackle a few each year. So, and we can look for that one later. I'm just not seeing it. But I guess I
And
agree.
Councilmember Anderson, you were thinking that was separate from the code of ethics?
I'm not sure. I just wasn't seeing it in here. Was that part of code of ethics that you couldn't hold 2 offices, or where would that? I don't see it. But I think that's okay. But I would agree that would make sense. So I'll follow along with what I'm hearing from my colleagues, and I have nothing else that I would want to add to it for this year. So thank you.
All right, then we have Councilmember Nguyen.
Thank you, Mayor. Attorney Rogers, I think voter fatigue is a concern, but I mean, the only one that did not pass was the mayor's 2-year term. And I think that the voters are educated, they're smart. I think they recognize that we're trying to make government more efficient and that these are changes that we just need to do. So I'm not against adding charter review ballot measures that would be, can be considered critical, but obviously any more cleanup I think is important, and I think voters should be able to decide. So yeah, those are my instructions, and I think we're in a good space. I think voters know, and people are engaged right now, especially during this political climate. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other feedback from my colleagues? I would just like to put in a vote for the IGA suggestion, Ms. Rogers, requiring the 2/3 vote when nothing else requires a 2/3 majority. I think it should be consistent with other contracts. That's my vote. That sounds good to me.
If I can have a minute, and I'll just tally up because I want to sum up and see if, to Councilmember Cohen's point, if we're at 5 or 6 questions and we have consensus on those, and I think we'll be good.
Okay.
I think I'm think my prediction was good tonight. I had 718 on the over under.
Oh,
All right. So actually, Brandon, weren't you talking? Oh, he already left. I was going to say he was talking about the Jeopardy words. Let's
Jeopardy
see.
music.
Thank you.
We needed that for the voting
Four,
last
six.
week. I saw that. I know what you're talking about and I can't find it either. Oh, okay, I'll go back to Councilmember Anderson. You had a follow-up.
Oh,
Okay, so we did find it. It, for the qualification of elected officials was 4.6. That was the added provision that changes, wait, that's the wrong one. There it is, the,
No two offices.
no two offices. Sorry, there, yeah, there it is.
which Councilmember Delgadillo had talked about. Okay,
Yeah, so that's the one that we were thinking of. It's 4.6.
Okay.
got it.
And we can revisit the rest next year, Ms. Rogers. Do we get them all done?
So yeah,
Okay.
please check me on this, but here's what I'm thinking. We've got a big cleanup, sort of the just language cleanup, not substantive changes. I'll try to make it as comprehensive as possible,
Mhm.
fit all the cleanups as I can. The second question would be 4.6, which is that no, well, it's got two components on the recommendation from the Charter Review Committee, that no map changes would impact a city council member. Like, we wouldn't be able to modify the word maps and suddenly Councilmember Lim is outside her ward. And the other part would be no dual offices, as Councilmember Delgadillo and Anderson mentioned. So that would be the second question. 3 would be a big question on vacancies. And I just want to touch base about this again, because we're talking about 50% absences means the seat is vacant. It's filled by appointment until the election. And the third part is a substantive one, that the mayor is filled by Mayor Pro Tem and not by the special election or appointment. I just want to make sure that's all going to be together in one question.
I believe a succession plan is important.
Mhm.
And the mayor pro tem is actually the most qualified to seamlessly, I know this from experience, take over for the mayor if they resign or can no longer finish their term, because the mayor pro tem is actually attending every meeting the mayor is, with the staff planning, with the agenda setting. So, and filling in most often. So to me, it's good governance to have a seamless transition, a smooth transition, and an important job like this. And that's why I advocate for it. Many communities already do this, Westminster, case in point. And it just allows more stability for the community if something like that were to happen. That's all. Yes.
Attorney Rogers, aren't I correct in remembering that the Charter Review Committee recommended, so the recommendation was the Mayor Pro Tem, but it also did away with the special election completely by making the appointment, the Mayor Pro Tem only good until the next election.
Right.
He double check to make
And so
sure.
you're saying that one doesn't have to be its own ballot measure?
It doesn't. I think we could put it all as changing 4.7, since they all are captured in the same section. I think we can hit single subject. I think last year when we were dealing with this issue, which is why I wanted to address it with council, is voters might have different views. They might fully support 50% equals absences equal vacancy, but they might not want the vacancy of a mayor to get filled in that manner, and you end up splitting the vote. So that's just a consideration as you're putting this together in one big question or separating it out.
So it does, but my understanding is it does three different things, right? It does, it's the 50%. It changes the council, because right now, if one of us was to resign, our appointment is filled the entire term. And the change makes it to just until the next coordinated election, right?
Until the next coordinated election, right?
And the mayor section. So it's actually three different, I mean, it's not different, but it's there's three components to it.
There's
Okay.
3 subparts,
So I
yeah.
could see the voters maybe voting against that, but that's, I guess, if they don't, I mean, if they voted down, we could always split it up later. So
We could, and we could have that discussion,
that's on there.
during first reading
True.
as well.
So you get some
Okay.
feedback.
So that would be, so cleanup, no dual offices, 4-7 vacancies, 4-11 code of ethics, and then 6-8 emergency ordinances. Those would be the
And the
Cohen
I-
5.
The
Just kidding.
IGA.
Oh, the
which is
IGA, I'm sorry, Mayor, and the IGA was
Chapter 16.
16-2. Yeah, so it would be 6 questions.
Okay. Y'all okay with that?
All right,
That's a head nod.
we will get those drafted and,
Councilmember Lim.
So the fact that the charter will say that council has to have a code of ethics, if that passes, I don't recall, are we going to put like a time frame on when it should exist? Or, I mean, obviously, I think there's a reference in there to, there's some kind of code of ethics in the Broomfield Municipal Code. There isn't one in the charter, but it's not implied that we would just copy it from Broomfield Municipal Code and put it in the charter. This is implying that there's going to be some group that goes off and makes up a code of ethics, or I'm not sure what this means then.
that's a great question. Thank you, Councilmember Lim. The recommendation by the Charter Review Committee was to lock it in charter that council had to adopt a code of ethics for its own behavior. We don't have that in charter right now, but as you pointed out, it is in code. This would avoid a situation where a council could repeal that code provision and not replace it with anything. So if this question is passed by the voters, then, and I can add a time limit, like within 6 months of the approval of this question, council shall adopt a code of ethics. And I think council can either decide that the code of ethics in the code is sufficient or to make changes. And I'm gonna, if I can, Mayor, look to Councilmember Marsh Holston, who was on the committee, to say, are you remembering anything differently? Did I summarize that right?
Yeah, that was right. I
Okay.
mean, we acknowledge the committee knew that there was already some in the code, but thought it probably could be stronger. So it was put in the charter so that it has to be there, and then council can then go look at it and make the changes necessary.
Okay.
But I like that time limit. And maybe I'll make sure that it's addressed either in the ordinance or in the actual question.
Okay, and I'm not sure, what would be the time limit. I'm looking to you, so people, I mean, 6 months seems possibly quick. Yeah.
I'd say a year.
I mean, you threw out 6 months and I'm like, whoa, okay.
No, we're so jammed. I think give some breathing room on it.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, and that might give a chance for us to either in panel, get a lot of stakeholder input. Do we like what the state has in Amendment 41? Do we like what our code has? And then, so yes, heard. And thank you for that time, because 6 months was tight, especially with a holiday that would have made it 4 months.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other feedback? You have some clear direction, Ms. Rogers?
Yes.
That concludes the agenda items for this evening's study session. Thank you all very much. Is there any other business to come before the council from my colleagues or staff? Seeing no further business, the study session is adjourned. Good night.